All right, so you want to deep dive into King Hashi with us, the Okinawan ruler who took this divided island and turned it into a major player in 15th century trade.
Definitely a fascinating figure.
He was operating in the early 1400s, right? A time of some major upheaval happening over in China, which, as we know, had ripple effects all across the region.
Yeah.
And Okinawa was right in the thick of it.
Absolutely. You can't really understand Hashi's rise without understanding the situation in China at the time. We're talking about the Ming Dynasty, and, well, things were far from peaceful.
Sounds like there was some serious drama unfolding.
Oh, there was plenty of that. So you've got Emperor Hongwu, the founder of the Ming Dynasty. He dies in 1398.
Okay.
His grandson, Huiti, takes the throne.
Right.
But then his uncle decides he wants power.
Classic power grab.
Exactly. And in the midst of all this, Huiti disappears. Vanished.
Oh, wow. Just like that.
Gone. They eventually find him, decades later, living as a monk.
Whoa. Talk about a plot twist. So China's got this, like, imperial soap opera playing out. And meanwhile, what's going on in Okinawa at the time?
Well, Okinawa wasn't exactly a unified paradise itself.
Right. It was split, right?
Yeah. 3 separate principalities, all vying for control. Chuzan, Hokkuzan, and Nanzan.
Okay. A recipe for conflict if I've ever heard one.
And that's where Hashi steps onto the stage.
So we've got a divided Okinawa in the early 1400s, and China's got its own issues brewing, setting the stage for, well, I'm guessing, a pretty interesting turn of events.
You could say that. Hashi was a pretty savvy leader. He understood how to seize an opportunity. Started as a local lord in Chuzan, an Anji, they called them.
Anji, like a powerful figure within the principality.
Exactly. But Hashi had bigger ambitions.
He saw an opening to maybe become the top dog, unify the island.
Exactly. He makes his move within Chuzan and ends up challenging the current king, Bunei.
Okay, and how does that play out?
Well, just like that disappearing Chinese emperor, Bunei vanishes from the historical records. Very mysterious circumstances.
Okay, 2 disappearances in a pretty short time frame. I'm sensing a theme here. What are we thinking, historians? Coincidence? Or a little too convenient?
It's a really interesting parallel, isn't it? Did Okinawans maybe base their story of Bunai's disappearance on Huiet's story to avoid saying, hey, maybe they got rid of him? We don't have all the answers because, well, we're working with limited sources here. But it definitely makes you think, right?
History's full of these little mysteries. Intriguing. So Hashi takes over Chuzan, but that's just one piece of the puzzle.
Right. He wanted more than just Chuzan.
You wanted the whole kit and caboodle.
He knew that to really solidify his power to be seen as legitimate, he'd need to get the official nod from, well, you know who.
China.
Exactly. This wasn't just some formality either. It all goes back to this concept of the mandate of heaven, a core idea in how the Chinese saw their emperor.
Okay, break it down for me, the mandate of heaven.
So basically, the emperor wasn't just a ruler. He was divinely appointed. His authority was absolute. And this idea, it had huge implications, not just within China, but for all the surrounding kingdoms, too.
So neighboring rulers, even if they were independent, they still had to kind of play by the emperor's rules.
You've got it. It was the name of the game back then. If you wanted to trade, if you wanted some level of security, you acknowledged the emperor's supremacy. You became what they called a tributary state.
Sounds like a pretty good deal, as long as you were okay with playing second fiddle in a way.
It was a strategic game, that's for sure. And Hashi, well, he played it masterfully. He sent envoys to the Ming emperor. At that point, it was the Yongle emperor offering tribute, acknowledging China's, well, let's just say, importance.
Paying respects and hoping for the best in return. Smart.
Yongle, I mean, he was all about expanding China's influence in the region, so he welcomed these envoys.
Win-win, right.
Exactly. And this is a really important part. Yongle officially recognizes Hashi as the legitimate ruler of Chuzan. That's huge.
Gives him a kind of legitimacy he wouldn't have otherwise.
Exactly. Hashi avoids a potential conflict, solidifies his own power, and now he can turn his attention to strengthening his kingdom. This was just the first step.
The first step on a long road to unification. So he's got Chuzan. It's more prosperous than ever. But what about those other 2 principalities, Hokkuzan and Nanzan? I can't imagine they were just thrilled about this whole unification thing.
You're right. It wasn't going to be easy. Hokkuzan especially, they had their stronghold up at Nakijin Castle, and they put up a fight, that's for sure.
I bet. But Hashi's got the resources now, the power of Chuzan behind him. I'm guessing he eventually wears them down.
He does. It took time and, yeah, some serious conflict. It makes you wonder, though, about the everyday people living through all this. What was it like for them becoming part of this new kingdom? Unfortunately, we don't always get those stories in the history books.
It's easy to forget that history is about people's lives, not just the rulers and the battles.
Exactly. But there are these glimpses, these stories that hint at the human cost. Like the 100 faithful retainers of Hokuzan, these warriors who chose death rather than surrender to Hashi. Talk about loyalty.
Wow. They were willing to die for their lord, for their way of life? It's a powerful reminder that these big historical shifts, they always have a human toll. So Hashi finally achieves his goal. Okinawa's unified. What's next? Does he just sort of, I don't know, retire, put his feet up?
I think you underestimate Hashi. The guy was a planner, always thinking a few steps ahead. Unifying Okinawa was huge, but he still needed to make sure it would last, that his rule was seen as legitimate.
So back to China it is, to solidify that relationship with the emperor.
Exactly. He sends another envoy over to China, this time to formally ask to be recognized as the king of all Okinawa. And this is where things get interesting. Remember how we were talking about the emperor?
The old...
All right, he'd passed away. And then his successor, he died pretty quickly after taking the throne, too. So Hashi's envoy, he ends up navigating these elaborate diplomatic ceremonies with a whole new emperor.
Talk about a crash course in imperial politics. But I guess it goes to show that things were constantly in flux in the Ming court.
Oh, yeah. And this new emperor, Xuande, he seemed pretty impressed with Hashi, with what he'd accomplished, how loyal he was as a tributary. So Xuande, he makes it official.
Hashi gets his crown, his royal seal of approval from the emperor himself.
He does. He officially recognizes Hashi as the king of Ryukyu, even grants him the family name Sho. This is a big deal. Hashi's dynasty, it's official now.
And so the Sho Dynasty of Okinawa was born. But I gotta say, knowing Hashi, I doubt he was just about the titles and the ceremonies. This was a practical guy.
Right.
What was he actually doing on the ground to make this new kingdom work?
Right. He was all about getting things done. And there's this great story about a bell he commissioned for Shuri Castle.
Every castle needs a good bell, right?
Yeah.
What's so special about this one?
Well, this bell, it was more than just a way to tell time or sound an alarm. It was symbolic. He actually had a message inscribed on it.
Oh, I love that. What did it say?
It said, "Ships are means of communication with all nations. The country is full of rare products and precious treasures."
Wow, even back then, he understood, like global interconnectedness. He saw the bigger picture. That's a message that still resonates today, centuries later.
Absolutely. That bell, it's like a reminder, of Hashi's vision. He saw Okinawa as this bridge between cultures, a hub for trade and exchange. He was a unifier, a reformer, and he really set the stage for Okinawa's unique place in the world.
So Hashi's vision of a unified Okinawa, it's a reality. But I'm guessing this wasn't just about conquering territories, right? He was trying to build something that would last.
Absolutely. Hashi understood that long-term stability, it required more than just military might. He needed to establish a system, a framework for governing this newly unified kingdom. And, it's fascinating to see how he drew inspiration from what was happening in China at the time.
Right. We talked about those Okinawan students who were going abroad to China to study.
Yeah.
I bet they came back with some pretty interesting ideas.
Oh, they definitely brought back more than just souvenirs. They'd seen firsthand how the Chinese administered their vast empire, and Hashi, he was smart enough to recognize that there were lessons to be learned there.
So it wasn't about just copying China outright, but about taking those ideas and adapting them to Okinawa's unique context.
Exactly. It was about, taking the best practices, the things that worked, and integrating them into Okinawa's own traditions and structures.
That's fascinating. So what were some of the key administrative changes that Hashi implemented? How did he actually go about shaping this new government?
Well, one of the first things he did was establish a system of ranks and official titles. This might sound bureaucratic, but it was crucial for creating a clear hierarchy within the government.
Right. It's about creating order, a sense of structure.
Exactly. And to manage the day-to-day affairs of the kingdom, he created administrative boards with specific responsibilities, much like what they had in China.
So like a board for finance, a board for agriculture, and so on.
Precisely. He even went as far as standardizing weights and measures, which might seem like a small detail, but it had huge implications for trade and commerce.
It makes sense. If you want to create a unified kingdom, you need to have everyone literally on the same page, or at least using the same ruler.
Right. It's all about those little details that add up to a more efficient and unified system. But Hashi's reforms, they weren't just about internal organization. He also understood the importance of Okinawa's strategic position in the region.
Situated right in the middle of those major East Asian trade routes, He had to have recognized that opportunity.
Oh, absolutely. Hashi saw the potential for Okinawa to become a major player in international trade, and he knew that to achieve that, he needed to make some bold moves. So he made the strategic decision to open up Naha, the main port in Chuzan, to foreign trade.
That's a big step. What was the reaction to that? Were people hesitant at first, or did they embrace this new era of openness?
It's hard to say for sure what the general sentiment was, but we can assume that there were probably some who were wary of these foreign influences. But Hashi's vision, it seems, was ultimately embraced. And it's not hard to see why.
Right, because this influx of trade, it would brought in new goods, new ideas, and of course, new wealth.
Exactly. And Naha, it quickly transformed into this bustling, cosmopolitan port city. Ships from all over China, Japan, Korea, Southeast Asia, they were all docking at Naha, bringing with them all sorts of exotic goods and spices.
I can almost picture it, this vibrant marketplace. Merchants from different cultures haggling over prices, ships coming and going. It must have been an exciting time to be in Naha.
I'm sure it was a sight to behold. And for Okinawa, it was a period of significant economic growth and cultural exchange.
But this new era of trade, it wasn't without its challenges.
Right, because navigating the complexities of international relations, it's never easy. Were there any specific incidents or conflicts that Hashi had to deal with? Well, there's this fascinating story about a trade dispute that arose between Okinawa and Siam, which we know today as Thailand.
Okay, trade disputes, those can get messy. What happened?
So it seems that Okinawan merchants were encountering some difficulties in Siam. Maybe there were some new restrictions imposed or perhaps some tariffs that they weren't too happy about.
Oh, the age-old story of trade barriers, never a dull moment. So what did Hashi do about it?
Well, he decided to take a diplomatic approach. He sent one of his high-ranking officials, a man named Kakinohana, on a mission to Siam to try and resolve the issue.
Wow, that's a long way to travel in the 15th century. Talk about a diplomatic envoy. Do we know anything about this Kakinohana? What kind of diplomat was he?
From what we can gather from historical accounts, it seems like he was a skilled negotiator. He managed to secure an audience with the Siamese king and presented Okinawa's case.
And the result? Was he able to smooth things over?
He was. It seems that Kakinohana was successful in persuading the Siamese king to lift those trade restrictions and restore more favorable conditions for Okinawan regents.
Wow. Diplomacy in action. It just goes to show you, even back then, building those international relationships, resolving conflicts peacefully, it was crucial for a kingdom's success.
Absolutely. And it's a reminder that diplomacy, it takes skill, patience, and a willingness to understand different perspectives.
It's a lesson that's still very relevant today, wouldn't you say?
Without a doubt. And, when we look back at Hashi's reign, it's striking how much he accomplished in a relatively short period. He unified Okinawa, implemented significant reforms, fostered this incredible period of economic growth and cultural exchange, and he did it all while skillfully navigating the complex geopolitical landscape of his time.
It's an incredible legacy.
Yeah.
He really set the stage for Okinawa to flourish as this unique and vibrant kingdom. And he left behind quite a story for us to explore centuries later.
He did indeed. And it makes you realize that history, it's not just about dates and names in a textbook. It's about real people making real decisions and shaping the course of history in profound ways. And Hashi's story, it's a perfect example of that.
It's a story that reminds us that even seemingly small islands, they can have an outsized impact on the world. And it leaves us with a lot to think about. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive into the fascinating world of King Hashi and the rise of the Ryukyu Kingdom. We'll see you next time as we delve into another captivating chapter of history.